What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the 2023-2024 season finale of Studs and Duds, the most comprehensive NFL player review series on the internet. For those longtime viewers of the channel, I know you've been waiting for this one, so thank you for your patience. How this is going to work here for the finale, I'm going to be making 8 of these episodes over the coming weeks, doing them 4 teams at a time by division, as each division is fully eliminated from the playoffs. So we'll be getting through these in due time as the playoffs wrap up here. But before we do get started, as always, I like to let people that may be new to the series know what Studs and Duds is all about. And what you may not know is back in 2016, this channel got its start actually as a Madden channel, where I have a custom community roster where I go and edit the player ratings to be what are, in my opinion, more accurate and realistic. And then I'd come on here and talk about what I was seeing in the games and why I made those changes. And while I no longer make Madden content on this channel, I do still do some rebuilds and stuff over on TFG Plays, my second channel, if you want to check that out. I do still make that roster and this series because it's a great way for me to do my research and stay on top of everybody around the league, but it's also a great way to convey and take a wide lens look at who the rising and falling players around the league are, who's trending up, who's maybe not playing so well for every single player around the NFL. And throughout this video, you're going to be seeing those Madden ratings going up or down. But I do want you to know that those changes do a pretty good job to reflect how I perceive these players in real life, and the changes certainly stem from me watching the film and doing my own research and analysis. But without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy. Please do hit that like button as we get into it, and let's get started. And today, we will be tackling the AFC East, starting in Buffalo, who had another kind of disappointing end to their season here. And unfortunately, we are going to talk about a decent chunk of players whose ratings are going to come down in this episode of Studs and Duds, leaving a lot of question marks for them this upcoming offseason. But let's start on a positive note with their kind of star highest riser of the season, not necessarily the team MVP, but someone that certainly deserves to be highlighted for their overall season, but also for this specifically the second half of the season, as our last episode of Studs and Duds did come around that week 9 mark. But James Cook for the Bills, this has been an absolute hit of a draft pick for the Bills, and he has really entered stardom as a running back for the Bills. And I do say running back because he isn't just a scat back that is, racking up receiving yards and catches and all that stuff. He had 1,250 yards on the ground this season, and I literally bet against that, like for underdogs season long. I think I took his under of like 750 rushing yards. I really thought this would be more of a split. I didn't think he could hold up as a guy that could, as he did this year, get 273 carries, including the 2 postseason games, and he absolutely did. 4.6 yards per attempt, 43 missed tackles forced, a bunch of breakaway runs, was just more patient and showed better vision and overall just capability as a runner that I even really ever thought James Cook could. Now, he's also been the impact in the receiving game that you expected that he would bring to the table as that second-round pick with his athletic ability. The one thing I want to say here is you might look at that 82 rating there and say that that's too low for him based on how dynamic he is, how big of an impact he is on the game. And I actually agree with you, but here's the problem. If you're talking about key things for running backs to do in terms of not fumbling the football and in the receiving game, not dropping the ball, he still has a lot to work on there. So it's not all good with James Cook. He had 4 fumbles, 7 brutal drops through the air. If he can clean that stuff up, you're going to see him really emerge as maybe like an Aaron Jones type of level of back. But regardless, he deserves a ton of praise for what he accomplished this year. And it looks like he's kind of just getting started here. But like I said, we've got some guys going down really on both sides of the ball. It's going to start with the offense, and the weaponry here in Buffalo really letting down Josh Allen, not just in that Chiefs game, though that's a part of it, but really throughout the course of the season and especially in the second half of the year. Stefon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Dawson Knox, all going to go down. We'll talk about them individually here. It's all a different story. But Stefon Diggs, I don't know, man. It's just the vibes are really bad with him, as has the production been. Everything felt kind of status quo, really up until our last episode of Studs and Duds. But since then, I mean, he's averaging, just kind of eyeballing it, like maybe 45 yards a game, 4 or 5 catches a game. And it's not like he isn't getting targets, right? Like his target share has really been the same, but just not coming down with contested catches, which is something that's been a bit of a strength for him, is really elevating and attacking that football, winning those back shoulder attempts. That just hasn't been there. His dominance as a deep threat hasn't been there. You see that big drop in that Chiefs game, certainly a concern. He's lost 3 fumbles this year. He's still, I think, a very good wide receiver. Ended up with, 1,250 yards, 8 touchdowns. But with all of the offseason drama, a guy that's 30 years old, you see a year like this, it certainly doesn't feel like he's likely to get back to that elite level. I'm not saying he can't do it, but it certainly is trending in the wrong direction for Stefon Diggs, and we're going to have to wait and find out if he's back in Buffalo next year with just kind of some of the off-the-field drama that has gone on with Diggs throughout his career. And then Gabe Davis, he's a frustrating one because he has 3 games on the year where he looks like a dominant vertical, frankly, elite X wide receiver within those individual games. But they're just way too few and far between at this point, and it's now spread out over the last 2 seasons. And last year, you were kind of able to excuse away some injury stuff and all that and say, all right, well, maybe he can get back to that 2021 level, get back to that guy he was at the end of his second season. And it just has not come. He continues to have frustrating drops. He continues to just disappear from the game plan, seemingly like he's really only a part of the game plan once a month is really what it is. And they just can't really count on him. He's set to be a free agent. I don't even know that he's going to get that much. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 1-year kind of $6 million, almost like Juju Smith-Schuster type of deal for Gabe Davis. And, maybe he can turn it around, but I'm certainly not counting on it at this point. I don't know a lot of Bills fans are going to miss Gabe Davis. And then Dawson Knox as well. He really has not responded well to them drafting another tight end in the first round. I mean, Dawson Knox dropped 14% of his targets this year, which was only 38 targets. That's a career low for him, but it's just, you can't have that. He wasn't really taking on the role as more of a blocking, I don't want to call him a blocking specialist, but when you draft Dalton Kincaid and want to run 12 personnel, you really need the other guy to man up and be a big-bodied guy. Certainly didn't really live up to that role. I mean, just 200 yards on the season, 24 catches. Dawson Knox, where you at? This guy's getting paid a lot of money to be a starting tight end in the NFL, and you couldn't really separate Dawson Knox from the majority of average tight end 2s in the NFL this year. So I don't really know where they go with him and that contract. He might be a cut candidate. I don't know how much guarantees are stuck on that thing, but he really has gone in the wrong direction there, leaving obviously 3 big question marks with a key receiving group heading into the offseason. But they do have Khalil Shakir, who they can hang on, who's been just fantastic this whole year, but especially in the last month of the season. While all these guys have been dropping passes and all that stuff, Khalil Shakir just had 1 drop on 56 targets this year, drop rate at 2%. So just super reliable as that slot receiver, but showing some explosiveness after the catch. Had that long catch and run against Miami that was a huge part of their ability to come back and win that game. But yeah, he's been honestly one of the better slot receivers in the league this year. The pro comp, like the best case scenario pro comp on him was Golden Tate. And I would say he hasn't been quite as like shifty after the catch as Golden Tate. Golden Tate had like a legendary juke move. But beyond that, the reliability and ability to get open quickly has certainly been there. And I think you have your clear-cut starting slot wide receiver in place for the foreseeable future in Buffalo. And then on the offensive line, a little bit of movement here. Spencer Brown at right tackle has continued to grow into himself, and it certainly has not been perfect. Really struggled against Micah Parsons, for example, struggled in that Miami game a little bit. So it's certainly not all perfect, but compared to what he was in the first 2 years of his career, where he was a liability in a playoff game and kind of was getting benched, all that, they really needed him to settle in this year, and he did. This is a freak athlete out of Northern Iowa. A great reminder why you draft traits and you trust your coaching, you trust your development, that these guys can get there. And I think Spencer Brown, heading into a contract year next year, if he continues to get better, could be, have that motivation and really reason to believe that he could be heading towards a massive contract if he can keep getting better. And then you're hoping that Osiris Torrance can, show some improvements in a similar way. Now, Torrance hasn't been like a turnstile. He hasn't been a huge liability. Second-round rookie out of Florida. He's had some good games out there, but he really did have some tough performances down the stretch. Gave up 6 pressures against the Miami Dolphins, 4 pressures against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 5 against the New York Jets. All of these games coming in the second half of the year. Those are good interior, D lines, but you certainly got to hold up a little bit better than that. Also 6 penalties on the year, so getting a little bit grabby. I'm still encouraged overall by Osiris Torrance, but definitely has some stuff to clean up and didn't finish the strongest this year. So he's just going to come down 1, and I fully expect he'll get it back at some point next year. But let's flip over to the defense, and we've got some bad, some good on this side of the ball. It was a weird year with all the injuries, but with all those injuries, someone they could really count on was Greg Rousseau, who I think he just continues to steadily improve since he got drafted, where I think he was better than a lot of people expected as a rookie and has just shown kind of steady growth since. He remains a excellent run defender off the edge, where not a lot of, there's certainly a collection of them, but it's not easy for a 6'6" edge rusher to be as stout and firm setting a hard edge as Greg Rousseau is, because he is a lengthy edge rusher, and it's hard to fill out that frame with good, adequate core strength, and he certainly does that. But his pass rushing profile continues to just impress. He had 62 pressures, another 7 sacks. He's not a overly consistent or dominant pass rushers, but he's certainly on the higher end of like really good number 2 type of guys. I still think they would benefit from having a true number 1 opposite of him that can win in a more variety of ways. But for a team that has a lot of questions this offseason, Greg Rousseau starting on the edge, being a good 3-down defensive player for them is not one of those questions. Now, opposite of him, Von Miller absolutely is. I don't know that he'll be back. I don't know necessarily what his contract situation is. In fact, we could look that up right now. And he's still $32 million in dead cap for next season. So they're kind of stuck with him here. That's a beast of a contract. Man, this couldn't have played out worse. And it's just, the injury is a big part of that, right? He was good when he first stepped on the field for him before that ACL tear. But, man, 35 years old, second ACL tear. He's had off-field troubles. It just has been a nightmare. This has turned into one of the worst contracts in the league. And you could certainly see how it held them back this year. Not just him not being really available to start the year, but they kind of forced him onto the field, hoping to get something out of him because they're paying him so much money. And for the majority of the season, he was just dead weight out there. 0 sacks, just 13 pressures on like 160 170, 180 pass rush snaps. Like, that's just laughable. Really wasn't stopping the run either. Just one defensive stop in that time. Literally dead weight from weeks 9 through 18, playing about half the snaps off the edge. Now, for what it's worth, he turned it on a little bit in the playoffs. A couple pressures, a little bit more high effort against the run, but it was only on 20 snaps a game in the playoffs. So, first ballot Hall of Famer, all that. But at his age, with the production we've now seen this year, how could you not lower Von Miller and have really serious concerns about what his future holds? Like, if he ended up retiring, I wouldn't be completely stunned. I like to think he doesn't want to end his note on the year that he tried to come back from an ACL. And maybe, you know, some of those flashes in the playoffs and getting another offseason to recover the knee could get him back to a level that he's worth something for the Bills, but you have to lower him and have to lower the expectations that he can do that. Now, these linebackers did step up, both Terrell Bernard and Terrell Dotson. You know, Bernard, I don't think he's a perfect linebacker. I think he still has a lot of questions in terms of coverage that still needs to come along, and he did miss over 15% of his tackles, so certainly some stuff still to work on before I call him a star or anything like that. But if Matt Milano were to have stayed healthy and he could have just continued to be that number 2 next to him, I think you would have been very happy with his performance. And even as a guy that had to step in and be their number 1 for the second half of the year, he performed valiantly. He was a physical run defender, 54 defensive stops on the season, so really getting to the ball, making an impact there. Was also an incredible blitzer for this team. Ended up with 8 sacks, 20 pressures, like huge year for Bernard as a blitzer. So definitely a useful linebacker with some flaws. But this is a long-term development position, and for a guy like Terrell Bernard to have so many strengths in year 2 and to step into that role and wear the green dot, which I'm pretty sure he did, certainly impressive. So he's going to get a +1. Curious where Bills fans are at on him. I've seen some very high praise for Bernard, but I see some of the missed tackles and some of the coverage deficiencies that he's had this year, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say he's like a star linebacker or anything like that. I think he's a good player. But Bills fans, I would love to know where you are at on Terrell Bernard and if this rating is fair. Terrell Dotson as well, definitely. I mean, he saw the field really because Milano went down, and he flew around and made plays, man. Another guy that was blitzing a good bit, getting after the quarterback there, but just felt like every week he was blowing things up at, behind, around the line of scrimmage. He, like Bernard, missed a few too many tackles for your liking, sitting at about 14%. It's about double the amount you would hope for from a starting linebacker. So again, not a perfect player by any means, but these guys definitely lived up to the call, and I think did a good job to make linebacker not an overall weakness on the season, whereas it could have been once Milano went down in the year after they just let Edmonds go. But then to the cornerback room, this is the group that really probably impressed me most from this team. Things very well could have gone south here with Tre'Davious White getting hurt again, yet again a year where they just don't really trust Kyer Elam, their first-round pick out there. But all these guys have stepped up, plus Rasul Douglas, who was a great acquisition. I think, I've been high on Rasul. I think he lived up to my expectations for him there, over an 80 rating. But all these guys have really played well, and they love their dime package here. A lot of times it's 4 corners getting significant playing time, and all these guys have played their role really well. I mean, Christian Benford was probably the best lockdown corner that they had this year, playing on the outside there, that big frame, a smart dude out of Villanova. Huge year from Christian Benford. I almost made him the star of the season, and you certainly could make a case for that. I don't know that his like ball production was incredible or that he's a superstar corner or anything like that, but man, he is solid, and they were able to just kind of rely on him all season long. He was credited with just 2 touchdowns allowed, only 28 yards per game allowed, did end up with 7 pass breakups, 2 picks on the season. I mean, he is a good, physical, smart perimeter number 2 corner at this point, which is incredibly impressive for this team to have found him in the 6th round. And they've needed that with Trey White going down. And then Dane Jackson, look, I think Dane Jackson's a really good player for what he is as a 4th corner that comes in as a dime guy, because he's one of these jack of all trades, master of none. He's not perfect every week. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy. So you can get him if you get him to have a false step. But overall, he's a really heady, aggressive zone corner. He's quick. He can be sticky in man coverage. He's not going to back down from a fight. He can press and do a lot of that stuff. So he's a really useful player. He had a lot of good games. Again, he had some not as good games as well, but he's set for free agency, and I could see Dane Jackson going somewhere else and being like a solid slot corner signing for someone, 2 years, $12 million, something like that. Keep an eye on him as an underrated free agent this offseason. And then Teron Johnson is their starting slot corner, and he had arguably the best year of his career. Just incredible job at keeping everything in front of him. As a slot corner for a defense that plays a lot of zone, you're inevitably gonna get credited with some catches allowed into your territory. But for the most part, it's him allowing stuff underneath, and then his best year preventing run after catch, his most consistent year as a tackler. He's been over 10% missed tackles in his career, and last year was his 2nd best year, and then this year finally got that under a 10% mark, tied his career high in defensive stops with 40 of them, which is a ton. He had 3 forced fumbles this season, a career low in yards allowed since he's been starting. Just a really good year for Teron Johnson, who's always been on the fringe of being one of the better slot corners in the league. But I think now he has as good of a case as he ever has to potentially be called the best true slot corner in the league. Now, unfortunately, this safety room is a change of course with this positive conversation for this secondary. Both Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are just showing clear signs of regression at their age of, they're both 33 years old. Hyde is a pending free agent, and he really looked like a shell of his old self, just was not around the ball very often, very little ball production. He had more missed tackles. It felt like so much more often with this Bills defense, you're seeing big plays happen, and then you see Micah Hyde arrive like 2 steps later, whereas in years past, he's getting that, interception with that crazy range, or getting to the sideline to prevent that running back from winning the angle and turning upfield. He just hasn't been able to get to that position this year, and that's a huge difference from the player he once was. Wouldn't be stunned if this is the end for Micah Hyde. We'll see what his market kind of is. It's not that he was horrible, but he was just very much an average safety this year. So a pretty big fall for Micah Hyde. That's -6 on the season. And then Jordan Poyer, I think, has a little bit more juice in the tank, and he does still have 1 more year left on his contract. So I think he still has 1 more solid year left in him. So that they only have to focus on replacing one of these spots. But this is now 2 years in a row that he hasn't been able to get back to, really the player he was in his earlier Buffalo days, where he was getting 3, 4, 5 picks every year, blowing things up in the backfield with defensive stop numbers in the 30s, consistently getting 80, 85, 90 tackles a year. It's just not the player he's been the last 2 seasons, and it's just time to reduce him a little bit further here. Still, I think, a good player. And again, I think they can count on him for 1 more year here, but it happens at this age, right? you can only bring that NFL play speed for so long. And I think it's made him a less efficient player than he's been in years past. And then we wrap up with the kicker, Tyler Bass. I don't think any Bills fans going to argue with this. Of course, the missed kick that cost them that Chiefs game in the end, but just was not a good year for Tyler Bass overall. The writing was on the wall that he hasn't been, what he's been, I suppose. He came in as an undrafted guy and has been, I would say, one of the 10 best kickers or so in the league since the second he entered it. But this year, man, he's been towards the bottom 10 in terms of the amount of kicks he's missed. Sounds like he might be dealing with a bit of an injury, and hopefully he can bounce back, but definitely needs to be dinged for a very mediocre season here in Buffalo. Then we have the Miami Dolphins, and honestly, not a ton to rave about, not a ton to bash them about either from kind of the second half of the year. Again, we're really focusing on week 10 forward here. Kind of a weird close to the season for the Dolphins. Certainly didn't live up to their hype. But their star of the season for me is going to be Bradley Chubb, who I was wrong about this trade for them. I was wrong about the level of pass rusher he could be for the Dolphins. And this year, it's part of what makes this injury just so tragic. I mean, he was having an absolute career year. Ends up getting hurt there week 17, but 70 pressures, 13 sacks, was just a menace. Now, a lot of his biggest games came against the Jets, against the Giants, against the Panthers, against the Titans. He did get a run of very favorable matchups, but he made the most of them and looked like a premium number one pass rusher for the course of this season. Now, I'm going to be honest, this would have been a +2 for him if the majority of his biggest games didn't come in those specific matchups, and he is now going to have to recover from, and even more so, this is just the reality of how I see this thing. It's not because I've been anti-Bradley Chubb in the past. I've said this about other players before, but he is now going to have to recover from his second career ACL injury. And I don't know that that's going to be an easy path for him at 28 years old. It's just everything, the timing of it, where they needed him at the end of the year after they had already lost Jalen Phillips for the year, with him playing in the peak of his powers after they traded a first-round pick and paid him for it to be at the end of the year where he's not going to be ready to start the year last year. It is going to be a really hard road back, and I promise you, I am cheering for Bradley Chubb to get back at this level. We are here to celebrate the year that he had, and really, if he had not gotten hurt, I think things could have been potentially different. I mean, they also got unlucky not being a cold weather team, having to go to Arrowhead, but maybe they beat the Bills in the last game of the year with a better pass rush like Bradley Chubb. So definitely want to shout out Bradley Chubb for his season. Let's move on and talk a little bit about this offense. And honestly, there's just not a ton to say. There weren't a lot of guys coming out of nowhere with impact performances. It was mostly just Tua, Waddle, Hill, the run game. So just less guys overall to talk about with the Dolphins. It was kind of the usual suspects, if you will. Whereas for a series like this, we're trying to talk about guys that either exceeded expectations or disappointed. There just wasn't a whole lot of that with the Dolphins. Anyway, let's talk about Tua. So he's still going to be a net positive in terms of rating increases on the season. But I'm going to take one of the two that we gave him after week 9, one of the 2 ratings points away from Tua. I do think as the season went on, you felt the turnovers rack up. You felt the predictability, just the predetermined reads that he has. It just felt like the weight of those mistakes was more and more and more, and kind of the inability to overcome difficult opponents in big moments, all capped off by, of course, that Chiefs game, which I don't even really hold that fully against him. But you do see the lack of arm talent, the lack of playmaking ability. It just is such a limiting factor when they go against really good defenses, really good opponents with a good game plan for this system that is, I would just say an offense that is the most dependent on the system and the play calling and the playmakers being there for the quarterback than anyone in the league. And it's a damn good system. But can they, I guess in this case, can they play right-handed? The saying is, can you play left-handed when someone forces you off of what you're good at? And right now with the Dolphins and with this quarterback, they just don't really have a counterpunch. And I do think Tua needs to come down and has a lot to play for next year. And I think the last thing the Dolphins can do right now is pay Tua this offseason. I really think they should look at this as a prove-it year from Tua. Can you get over the hump and win some of these big games? Damn it. But some of these other players in the offense are going to go up. Devon Achane, I mean, just kind of was back at it when he came back from injury. It took a little while, but God, he's just so fun, man. And I've talked about this with Achane a little bit. I've talked about this with like Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit, Keaton Mitchell in Baltimore. The combination of these guys have just reshaped my lens as a scout for how I look at these types of backs. And I think that the modern NFL is more willing to use these smaller backs. Achane listed at like 5'8", 180, maybe 190, soaking wet. The modern NFL is more willing to use these players, but I think the way that they're schemed into successful situations where you have like a creative wide zone run game like here in Miami, or the ways that Ben Johnson is able to get the ball in the hands of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. And we talk all the time about pass rushers being able to convert speed to power, right? Where even if you're a smaller pass rusher, if you've got the get off and the speed, well, force equals mass times acceleration. And in the right usage, guys like Achane can actually run with power and contact balance, not in like a run through a guy type of way, but run through arm tackles and break tackles and that kind of thing. And we've definitely seen that with Achane, whose efficiency is just through the frickin' roof. I mean, he had 30 missed tackles forced. I haven't done the math, but I know certainly if you projected his workload out over the course of the season, he would be, I would bet, towards the top 3 or 5 in the National Football League in missed tackles forced. So, and that also counts his elusiveness and juking guys and all that stuff, which counts as well. But a lot of that is just contact balance and straight up broken tackles. So it's a small sample size. I don't think we can just jump to crowning Devon Achane as like a top 10 running back or anything like that. But it certainly feels like as soon as he gets that workload, if he can hold up durability wise, he certainly can be something like maybe a Chris Johnson. And that's high praise, but I think his tape speaks for itself. So excited for him. And then he's getting a little bit of help from the offensive line in the run game from Austin Jackson here, getting a +2 really from his emergence this season as a run blocker. Now, he's in one of these Shanahan-style kind of play-action-heavy offenses that when you create moving pockets, it does protect a guy like Austin Jackson from having to get into traditional drop back passing looks where you're getting those deep kick slides and have to use traditional pass blocking technique. So I think that has helped him in terms of overall pass protection, but also Tua, the best thing about him and why he's still up there as an 82 rating for me is his ability to get rid of the ball incredibly fast and protect these guys. You rip, you kind of peel back the layers of the play action and Tua getting rid of the ball. Let's not deny Austin Jackson is still a abysmal pass protector and he's a huge concern in that regard. But the first round draft pedigree, the athleticism, the familiarity in this system, he has really emerged as a mauling run blocker for what that is worth. He's kind of like a poor man's Mike McGlinchey with those 49ers connections here with Mike McDaniel there at right tackle with some of the impact blocks he's making there. So we'll see what his future holds. I think he's a pending free agent. I don't know that there's going to be a big market for him. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back. Would love if he could clean up the pass pro a little bit more still, because he had some costly outings as a pass protector even in the second half of the year. But again, the run blocking here for Austin Jackson has been phenomenal. Let's talk a little bit more about this defense. And, Andrew Van Ginkel, along with Bradley Chubb, he really stepped up, and he's another one of these guys that made the most of some very favorable matchups again this year. You know, they got the Titans, they got the Jets twice, they got the Giants, they got the Panthers. They had really some of the worst opposing offensive lines that they got to see in the league this year and in many recent years. Like, there were some really bad offensive lines in the league this year, and the Dolphins ran into all of them. So it is something to keep in mind for these guys next year. I do think that matters, but what also matters is dominating those matchups like Andrew Van Ginkel did. And, you know, you see him out there winning with spin moves and the bend, and he has been dubbed as very much like one of these hybrid linebacker types, a really good run defender and a smart guy, one of these edge guys you can drop into coverage. But this year, we really got to see a true pass rushing profile for him, and that's exciting. So he's going to go up one for kind of getting some more of those pass rushing skill sets to his game. And then you get to the second level. Both these linebackers are going to go up. David Long, who is a very polarizing player. He is a highlight reel waiting to happen. He has never seen a play fake that he doesn't like. He is incredibly aggressive. I would say the most like he is the line. How do I word this? No linebacker in the NFL forgoes processing like he does. He just follows the ball, and it's going to lead to some busted run defense plays. It's going to lead to some really bad coverage busts against play action and that sort of thing. And even just in his zone drops, he's going to, you know, I like when guys attach to receivers, you know, man to man, but man, it's just not always the best look for David Long. But the amount of highlight plays he makes coming downfield, making run stops, and the speed he plays at helps him get off blocks and be a nasty presence around the line of scrimmage. He's a very unique kind of heat-seeking missile without a targeting system, but he's done a good job this year coming into Miami. He deserves to go up again here, as he has throughout the season. And then Duke Riley. How about Duke Riley sticking around here? He was supposed to be the next Deion Jones. That really dates his pedigree here in the NFL. But, you know, Deion Jones comes out as a mid-round super athlete out of LSU. Duke Riley followed suit. Everyone was like, oh, he's just Deion Jones again. Not so much. He has bounced around the league. He's had to gain weight in a good way and really learn the position throughout the years, but settles in here in Miami as their LB2. And unfortunately, around that week 13 mark, I think it was exactly week 13, Jerome Baker went down with an injury, and Duke Riley had to step in as that kind of looser, I don't want to say full-on coverage linebacker, but they did count on Jerome Baker for a lot of that stuff, and Duke Riley stepped into that role and played it really well. He held up okay in run defense, still a guy that misses a million tackles. It's a big thing with David Long, by the way, is his aggressiveness leads to a lot of broken tackles. But Duke Riley definitely held up as a very serviceable veteran LB2, and I think he is in that role to stay for this foreseeable future. Started about 6 or 7 games this year, and they really didn't miss a beat, honestly, with him stepping in for Baker, who's a good player. But then you get to the secondary, just not a good year for these veterans. You know, Xavier Howard, he is fascinating because he gets targeted a ton here, especially since Jalen Ramsey came back. They were like, you know, receivers are separating against Xavier Howard, and we're going to target him. And to put this in perspective, he played about 230 coverage snaps less than he played last year. He played 700 coverage snaps, 642 the year before that. So in about 60% of the total snaps, he was targeted just 10 times less than those previous 2 seasons, 71 targets this year. So teams really were watching the film and was just reading things out in real time and saying, look, we can go at this guy. And he gave up over 500 yards in, 10 games, 12 games, whatever it was. Now, the thing with Xavier Howard is it's not that he sucks. Like, he has some good games. He's still good enough that if you are going to target him, he can come in and make some plays on the ball. He still has some of the best ball skills as that former wide receiver that's converted to corner, a guy that had a 10 interception season for a reason. He still has some big games because of that. And you see, like a really good game against the Jets, couldn't really take advantage of him. The Chiefs, another one of these. So it's not that he's trash, but he was ranked up there quite high, and he's a corner that is just not very sticky in coverage these days. So he's going to come down. I still think he's probably good enough to be their CB2 next year next to Jalen Ramsey, but I wouldn't be stunned if they looked at this and said, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction, maybe try and save some money. But they can't save that much because Xavier Howard's been one of these guys with some pretty major contract demands. So I think they are kind of stuck with him, and hopefully he can just hold up okay as a CB2. But then Eli Apple had to play a lot this year with some of the injuries back there, and he's been a guy that's just incredibly polarizing. He's actually had, that one Super Bowl run for the Bengals. He was an okay, third corner, but not so much for the Dolphins this year. He was getting picked on left and right. So it's not like he was rated that high, but he's losing yet another ratings point there. And then on the back end, quietly, honestly, Javon Holland missed a ton of time in the second half of the year. Missed a whole month of football in December, and then unfortunately got hurt in that Buffalo game and missed the playoffs. So Brandon Jones, who's been a starter in years past for Brian Flores' defenses, he was supposed to be kind of their box safety. Like, think about all of the incredible things that Josh Metellus is doing for the Vikings in that kind of like box safety, bandit safety role. He wasn't really good. He wasn't Josh Metellus at all in that role. But a different system, for whatever reason, has actually really worked for him in that kind of Fangio split zone off quarters style cover 6 heavy defense, where Brandon Jones is playing a lot of 2-shell, can play a lot of deep halves, a lot of quarters. He's actually grasped that system quite well back there, and they really didn't have to think about him back there. It wasn't the playmaker that Javon Holland was, but he was just fine, was a secure tackler coming downhill. So that's a pleasant surprise. I wasn't really sure that was, because he was this box safety coming out of Texas, and then Brian Flores thought he was going to be that guy. He never really was all that good in that role, but turns out he actually has some pretty good IQ on the back end to run these types of systems. So we'll see what happens with him. I believe this was year 4 for him. He's going to be a pending free agent and might be a decent option for teams that still want to run the kind of Fangio style system, although most of those teams are more busy firing their coordinators than hiring guys to run those schemes these days. But then we've just got the kicker, Jason Sanders. Still doesn't really have too much of a leg in terms of range on him, and most of his misses came on those deeper kicks, but was very, very accurate overall. So he's going to get a nice +4, and that rounds out your Dolphins. Next up, we have the New York Jets. And believe it or not, I had a hard time choosing for their star of the season. I originally had Quincy Williams, who's got a massive +9 on the season. We'll give him a shout out now. But I had to go with Sauce Gardner when I took a second look at this thing. I mean, in year 2, Sauce Gardner is already playing the position at a Hall of Fame level, assuming health. That's the type of player we're talking about here, heading up closer and closer towards that 99, the TFG 99 club, which for a guy in year 2, that's, I don't think that's ever been done. But I tweeted out some stats here. Among cornerbacks who played at least 80% of his team's snaps, basically, I'll put the tweet up here. There is a massive gap between Sauce Gardner and the rest of the league. He's allowing just 15.5 yards per game, under 2 receptions per game. And even if you sort by 50% of snaps on the season, only 2 corners, Jalen Johnson and Jalen Ramsey, allowed less yardage, but that was on less snaps. And Sauce isn't even that far ahead of them in terms of total yards allowed. Like Jalen Ramsey allowed just 2 less yards on the season, but played 3 more games worth of. But Sauce played 3 more games worth of coverage snaps, 162 more snaps. So that's just the territory he is in. He is, as I did in my cornerbacks video, in my opinion, in a tier of his own. And that's not a disrespect to Pat Surtain and Jalen Ramsey and these great corners in the league. But Sauce is just doing it at a different level. And sure, he's in a situation where he's got this great scheme and pass rush to help him reach those numbers. But no one's really sniffing being a lockdown corner in the NFL other than Sauce Gardner right now. So had to make him the star of the season because he's been one of the stars of the season in the entire NFL. But unfortunately, we have to spend some time talking about this offense that just, this group was injured to all hell, not just Aaron Rodgers, but the offensive line as well. It was just a forgettable season for the Jets, a memorable but a forgettable one. And hopefully they can add some pieces, get Aaron Rodgers back, and be the team that can hopefully be a Super Bowl team next year. But if they're going to do that, they got to take the GM powers away from my guy Aaron. At least don't let him convince you to bring in his guys. Between Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, and these 2 wide receivers, just a disaster, man. There's no other way to put it, especially in terms of Allen Lazard, who you could have seen this coming, man. He was not good in Green Bay. He was force-fed targets because Aaron Rodgers liked him. When you have an elite quarterback forcing you targets, you're going to stumble into some big plays and big moments, and you're going to stumble into a nice contract in the league when you put up numbers. But he had no business getting a 4-year, $44 million contract. They are stuck with him this season. They can't get out of this deal. They might end up cutting him just to save whatever they can and to get him off the team because he is a literal liability. He's out there in practice kicking soccer balls around. When the games start, he's a slow, lumbering 6'5" receiver who went undrafted for a reason because he can't separate. But on top of that, he has piss poor hands, not just drops. But this dude, so if you're going to be 6'5", 220 pounds or whatever he is, and you're not going to separate, you better be winning at least 40% of your contested catches. He's rarely been in that throughout his career, but this year he won 3 out of 17 contested catch looks. So you think you can throw him balls, you think you can trust him to box out corners and make tough catches, but he's not. Just a literal waste of space. I was saying this in Green Bay for years that he is a wide receiver 5 or 6 caliber player being forced into a wide receiver 2 role. We saw that. We saw what that looks like when you don't have Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. Maybe with Rodgers coming back, they can rekindle that thing next year. But they really need to look elsewhere and don't let them get into a similar situation that Rodgers was in Green Bay, where he kind of needs someone to step in and be like, hey, Aaron, we can give you better than Allen Lazard if you let us. And then Randall Cobb, he should not be back, at least as a player on this team. You want to bring him back as a wide receiver coach or something, that'd be great. But he was dead last in the NFL in yards per route run among receivers that received at least 15 targets. Just, again, wasted. Both these former Green Bay receivers just wasted space and literal liabilities for this Jets team. But Tyler Conklin, the tight end, did step up to a degree here, was just very reliable underneath in the receiving game. Whatever quarterback was in there any given week, they needed to get that ball out and have a possession tight end available for them, considering the offensive line was such a disaster. And Tyler Conklin was that guy. Just 1 drop this season on 83 targets. Hauled in a nice 66% of his contested catches. So just a big, reliable possession tight end. Not really much more other than that, but he has impressed me this season. And then one more player on offense. with some ratings change this week. Max Mitchell, the right tackle, was not a good season for him. Year 2, I think 4th round pick last year that showed some promise as a rookie. Now, I know he was dealing with some blood clots and stuff, so you don't want to slam him, but really was not an option for them at right tackle, and they're going to be, I think, looking elsewhere at that right tackle spot this offseason. I do want to shout out Joe Tippmann, who I think in the last maybe 5-6 weeks of the season started to look a little bit better. Still some hiccup games in there for sure, but I think you saw enough to have some promise that he could be a good starting center for them next year. They spent a 2nd round pick on him, so they need that from him. Again, the inconsistency was still a little bit too much for me to raise him when he is up there already, relatively high with that 2nd round draft pedigree, but started to live up to it a little bit after some early season struggles. But I think the move back to center where he's comfortable certainly helped. But let's talk about this defense that, man, a credit to them. When they could have lost their energy, they could have let this season completely get away from them. They didn't let that happen, and this defense alone just won a handful of games for this Jets team, and they just, it's so sad to know what happened on the offensive side of the ball when you looked at what this defense did, and they were on the field the majority of the game, right? So it just... Let's get into it. Let's praise these guys. We already talked about Sauce, but Quinnen Williams was another star of the season candidate. He has broken out in the biggest of ways. Like, he's been a great player in years past, but got that big contract this offseason, and he lived up to it. 70 pressures, 6 sacks, his best year as a run defender as well, which is really notable because the rest of the defensive tackles on this team are undersized. Solomon Thomas, Quentin Jefferson, John Franklin Myers will slide inside. Quinnen is the guy, and Al Woods got hurt. He is their nose tackle. Quinnen is the guy that has to really dig in and put in the dirty work in run defense that can help them get to these pass rush situations and set the line of scrimmage up front. It's not easy to do that alone, but then to still have the stamina to get after the passer and have a 70 pressure season. It really was a remarkable year for Quinnen, who has certainly entered the group of honestly elite defensive tackles. There's more and more of them now with some of these guys breaking out. But then this edge group that is just so special on top of what Quinnen's doing. We've already praised Bryce Huff, and John Franklin Myers continues to do his thing in there. No ratings boost for them here for kind of the second half of the year. Really excited, though, I will say, to see what Bryce Huff gets in free agency, whether that's here or somewhere else. I would love to see if he can continue to kind of climb the ranks as a full-time starter, maybe somewhere else. I don't know, but these other pieces that aren't just pieces. These are first-round picks the last 2 years, right? Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, looking like hits. I mean, in the case of Jermaine Johnson, he looks incredible. I mean, he looks better than 2 guys that got drafted ahead of him within New York in Kayvon Thibodeau and in Jacksonville with Trayvon Walker. He's doing it in both phases of the game as well. Had 31 defensive stops, but another 56 pressures, 9 sacks, even had an interception in there. That was the one against the Browns earlier in the game that kind of kept that game alive. I'm pretty sure he took it for 6. So he has been a big impact player for them in year 2. Wasn't really a full-time starter in year 1 with all these guys, but this year they've found a way to get him on the field. It's kind of come at the cost of snaps for Michael Clemens, who actually outsnapped him the year before, who he himself is doing his role as a good run defender, steps inside sometimes. But him and Will McDonald is kind of going through what Jermaine Johnson went through last year, where it's like, well, there's only so many snaps to go around, but I'm going to do what I can in those opportunities. Will McDonald has played just 183 snaps in 15 games. So, you're talking about, 12 snaps a game. But he ended up getting to the quarterback, 4 sacks on 12 pressures, and he is one of these guys, reminds me of Hassan Reddick, which was a common comparison for a guy like Will McDonald, or Harold Landry as well, where he is so bendy and so fast and explosive that he is a guy that is probably, like we spent a lot of time talking about sacks and pressures and how usually you're only going to turn a certain amount of your pressures into sacks. But some of these guys, it does make sense why their pressure numbers might be a little bit lower, but their sack numbers will be high when they win so quickly, like Will McDonald. So for McDonald to have 4 sacks on just 12 pressures kind of makes sense. But also has done a decent job against the run as well. And he's one of these edge guys that in college was asked to play like inside the tackles, despite the fact that he's built like Hassan Reddick at 240 pounds. But with that experience, he defended the run well and very valiantly for his size. Now getting to do it a little bit more traditionally off the edge in New York, and he's done it very well. I mean, 9 defensive stops in 82 run defense snaps, like doing a good job in that phase. So you like what you see in Will McDonald. I still continue to beg the question of like why they felt the need to draft McDonald in the first round. Not that he was a bad player or anything, but at least, you know, he's showing that he can play, and whenever he gets that opportunity, you expect that, you know, he's going to get that nice production bump. And then you get to the second level, Quincy Williams. I mentioned him at the top, a star of the season candidate. I believe he ended up getting in as a second team All-Pro, but was completely snubbed of the Pro Bowl. Now, his season tapered off a little bit as the year went on, started to miss a few more tackles for your liking, which was something that earlier in the year looked like he was cleaning up a little bit more. But still, man, leads the NFL in defensive stops with 80. You heard that right, 80 defensive stops, which are, if you need a reminder, those are plays that per PFF are deemed basically the player made a play that constitutes a loss for the offense via the run game, which I think is a tackle of 3 or less yards. So it can be a TFL or right at or around the line of scrimmage. But he didn't just lead the NFL in defensive stops. He had 10 more than second place Bobby Wagner and Levante David, and then 20 more than fourth place Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So that goes to show you just how fast this guy is flying to the football, and to have him next to CJ Mosley, it's so fun because Mosley is a much more disciplined, I'm not going to say he lets everything come to him, but basically his play style, being more consistent and in the right place all the time, allows Quincy to just fly around and make plays. And it wasn't just in run defense that this showed up. Quincy Williams also led all linebackers in pass breakups. So it was showing up in both phases of the game. Just such a fun player to watch. Gonna be tough to repeat that type of numbers, but if he does, it's gonna be time like next year to start talking about Quincy Williams as a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. But then you get to the secondary, and it's good back there, too. I mean, we already talked about Sauce and how amazing he's been. But Michael Carter, too. Look, man, he has arrived as one of the premium slot corners in the league. Right up there with guys like Teron Johnson, Kenny Moore, Brian Branch, who's there right now. Like, Michael Carter is right there with those guys. I didn't think he would get to this level after his rookie year. I thought he was a little overrated, but at this point, I mean, he is the ideal slot corner. He has done such a great job, very similar to what we've talked about with Teron Johnson, at just cleaning up his tackling consistency. Dude, from week 8 on, Michael Carter was not credited with a single missed tackle. If that continues, that's insane. Slot corner is arguably like, it's one of the most important positions on the defense in terms of tackling consistency, because you're putting these guys in really difficult situations on screens and dump downs and stuff, and you missing that tackle is often the difference between a 4-yard completion and a 12 or a 15-yard completion and a first down. So it's just been so consistent from Michael Carter, shutting stuff down. I mean, his longest receptions allowed in the second half of the year were 13 yards, 24 yards. The majority of his weeks, the longest receptions he allowed were 8 yards, 7 yards. Like, that's crazy. So what a year for Michael Carter. And you cannot argue at this point that the Jets have the best cornerback room in the league. Like, there is a significant gap between the Jets and whoever you want to argue as number 2 at this point, because DJ Reed, not going up in this episode, but he's continued to be a monster this year too. And then you get to the safeties, and they've had some issues with this safety room throughout the year, just guys getting hurt. They ended up releasing Adrian Amos midseason. But hey, how about Ashton Davis, the former 3rd-round pick? He actually ended up with 3 interceptions on the season, only started 1 game, but was kind of rotating in and out in certain packages throughout the year and had made some plays. Had an interception against the Chiefs. He had an interception against the Bills, an outstanding pass breakup against the Giants. So, like, he was showing little flashes throughout the year, but week 18, he gets the start out there, and he ends up with an interception and 2 pass breakups on the Patriots. He is set for free agency, maybe a little bit ticked off that he didn't get more playing time this year. I think, he was a very talented prospect. A lot of people thought he was going to work out with the Jets, and I think a change of scenery is necessary at this point. Although maybe they really liked what they saw from him and give him a starting opportunity next year, bringing him back on a cheap kind of prove-it deal, or at least as a safety 3, maybe not necessarily as a starter. But he is one of these interesting guys that I think showed some flashes and could be a sneaky pickup, someone that I'm still not quite ready to quit, Ashton Davis. And then the other young safety, Tony Adams, undrafted rookie last year out of Illinois, who kind of broke into the lineup late in the season, had a lot of hype coming into the year, winning that job from Adrian Amos after Chuck Clark went down. And it wasn't the cleanest start to his season, but I think he really finished strong. Just kind of wearing a lot of hats, moving around the safety room there. Just held up very well in the last, I would say, 2+ months of the season. So pretty easy to expect that he'll be a starter to some degree for the Jets next year, and I think he's earned that. And then the kicker, Greg Zuerlein. Greg the Leg is back at 35 years old, made 92% of his kicks, and was a monster for a team that had a really hard time converting down in the red zone. For anybody that had Greg Zuerlein in their fantasy leagues, I think you're pretty happy with him. So this Jets team is fascinating, man. This defense, as we know, it's not easy to keep these incredible team defenses together forever. Guys get older, guys leave in free agency, and you look ahead to this offseason, it's really just Bryce Huff right now is set to leave, but they have Will McDonald hopefully ready to take that role. But they got work to do offensively, man. They got to find some playmakers. They got to find answers on that O-line. If they do, Super Bowl expectations for this team should be back next year, in my opinion. And now we wrap up with the New England Patriots. So I'm going to be honest, I had to go back and watch some of these end-of-season games because I was probably, like a lot of you, tuning out this team that had just such a disastrous season. Obviously, Bill Belichick out here, but there is actually a lot to talk about, and I know Patriots fans will appreciate that, and probably a lot of you that want to know what's going on in New England but didn't have the patience to watch their games. So let's get into it and do our best here. Their star of the season is going to be Christian Barmore, who, for what it's worth in New England, really came on in like the last 2/3 of the season. Maybe a little bit more of a quiet start to the year, but he ended up with 49 pressures, 8 sacks, some dominant games in there. Like what he was doing to the Giants and Broncos offensive lines at the end of the year was just unfair. And I've always been a big Barmore fan, so that's why it was disappointing to see him off to such a slow start, because I really felt like he could take that leap towards being like a Jeffrey Simmons level pass rusher, but certainly got back to the hype. I'm not going to quite say he's Jeffrey Simmons, but heading in the right direction for sure. So a huge way to finish the year for Christian Barmore. We'll circle back to the defense in a little bit here, but let's talk about this offense, I guess, if we have to. It's mostly players going down, and that's got to start with Mac Jones, who's just been broken by a lack of pass protection, play calling, receiver play, but it's not just that. Like, he is now compounding that with mistakes and bailing out of clean pockets in a way that he didn't always do. It just is so reminiscent of quarterbacks that have been destroyed by poor situations in the past. And I'm not quite ready to quit Mac Jones entirely. Like, I think he could go somewhere like New England, San Francisco, for example, and really thrive. Granted, a lot of quarterbacks could, but we know Kyle Shanahan liked him some Mac Jones. So call that a prediction that he maybe ends up released in New England, or maybe he'll be a backup here to a rookie quarterback or something. But either way, like, I could see him resetting and getting that confidence back, because I still know that he can read defenses and, prep and throw an accurate football and at times showed a brilliant pocket presence. That was always something I liked about Mac Jones, but he's got to find a way to get that back. But clearly needed to go down. He gets benched for Bailey Zappi here, which that alone speaks for itself and why Mac Jones needs to come down. But hey, Bailey Zappi had a couple performances in there. The Broncos game, the Bills game, where he was kind of balling, but then he goes right back week 18 against the Jets to looking like a backup. But definitely deserves a little credit for showing some higher level starts in there. That's what backup quarterbacks do, right? They can give you some wins any given Sunday, but you certainly don't expect it, and they're capable of stinkers as well. So that's who Bailey Zappi is. But let's talk about these wide receivers. So let's give you the good news first. Demario Douglas has been extremely reliable for this Patriots team, a day 3 rookie out of Liberty. And God, they've needed him, especially after Kendrick Bourne went down. Even when Kendrick Bourne was in there, though, Demario Douglas was the guy with the juice, the guy they could manufacture touches for, count on to get open. And that has continued into the second half of the year. It feels like every single week he's getting anywhere from 4 to 7 catches, 40 to 60 yards. Nothing insane from Demario Douglas. He's kind of one of these gadget/slot type of wide receivers, but has shown some pretty secure hands, has shown some route running. He should be their starting slot wide receiver next year, no doubt. But these two veteran guys, Juju Smith-Schuster, Devontae Parker, just more of the same, not being anything close to their former selves. And, both these guys actually had pretty good years last year, Parker and Smith-Schuster, but they haven't been able to step up this year, and with Smith-Schuster, you hope that report that his knees are like a ticking time bomb, that kind of came out after the Patriots signed him. You hope that's not really the full reason here, and he had a down year before, the year before he went to Kansas City, so he's only 26, 27 years old. You hope maybe he can turn things around, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon based on the film he's putting out there. He's just not separating and doing anything after the catch as he's done in years past. And then Devontae Parker, I don't even really have an answer for you. Is it, age or just he's checked out? I don't know. But it's such an abysmal season. I mean, he can make a couple plays and whatever, but he's entering, he's a 30-year-old wide receiver 4 at this point, unfortunately for New England. And then the falls continue here. Mike Gesicki, I don't know why his agent thought that this could be a fruitful situation for him on a 1-year prove-it deal, but it absolutely was not. And, he still made some tough catches, came down with over 50% of his contested catch looks and didn't have drops or anything, but was just nowhere to be found, not a part of the offense at all outside of a couple red zone looks, it felt like. And anytime you are interchangeable with Pharaoh Brown, it's just, and you have 200 yards on a full season and you're rated as a 79, it's just time to come down. It is. I still think a different situation. He could get back to being the guy he was in Miami, like pre-Mike McDaniel scheme. But, Hunter Henry was pretty solid and just kind of rendered Mike Gesicki useless here. He is going to come down. just for the lack of production, but it's nothing major here, and nothing I don't think he can't get back in a better situation. A player to keep an eye on in free agency, Mike Onwenu as well. He's going to be interesting. He's a pending free agent, and he's going to come down. They gave him the full-time conversion to right tackle, and they did that because he's held up incredibly well at right tackle in the past. Now, he's 6'3", so he's short, 350 pounds. Like, he is a prototype mauling, compact guard. So it was always a surprise that he was so good at tackle. And there were a couple games this year when he ran into the Chargers, and specifically what TJ Watt was able to do to him against Pittsburgh, where he gave up 4 pressures in that game, 3 sacks allowed on the season, a career high there. Just showing some inefficiencies at tackle. It's nothing super problematic. He was mostly good with some big hiccup performances. He also struggled week 8 against the Miami Dolphins. So for a guy that was rated very highly, to see some of those major just slip up games, maybe a little matchup dependent, maybe a little inconsistent, whatever it is, I think he needed to come down a little bit. I still think he'd be an excellent free agent signing for someone, whether that's at guard or tackle. I don't know. I know Patriots fans are going to want him back. I'm not trying to slam the guy. It's just he'd been an absolute monster. I wouldn't describe his season as an absolute monster this year. He was just really good. And then David Andrews is going to come down. This is the second year in a row now that he started to show some real holes as a pass protector, and they were really accentuated this year with having to deal with just rookie guards next to him. Sidney So, Antonio Mafi next to him through the majority of the season there. And even Cole Strange hasn't really taken that step. But without real anchors next to him, David Andrews has struggled. And he is 6'3", 300 pounds, so he's actually quietly kind of undersized there. But yeah, I mean, he's got to come down. He gave up a career high in pressures of 30 pressures. That's just not going to cut it. He hadn't given up more than 20 in the last 4 years. So offensive line is going to be a big question mark for New England, unfortunately, post-Belichick era. And Sidney So as well. I have him in my notes category. We actually raised him after the last episode of Studs and Duds. He's just one of these guys that he's totally split in terms of pass pro versus run blocking. Like, he's athletic, he's super strong, 25-year-old guy. Like, that wasn't really a question for him, was run blocking come out, and he's been paving ways. He's made some impact blocks. He's been really fun as a run blocker. So if you want to talk about like my Madden ratings changes here, I bumped up his run blocking, but at the same time, I had to nerf down his pass protection because he has been a turnstile in the second half of the year. So he's got to figure out the pass pro there. Otherwise, there's a lot of signs that he's got the tools to play at this level. It's just, it's technique and repetition that's got to get better there for him. Let's talk about this defense. Certainly some good, some bad. And I think when you look at some of the lack of ability for this defense to reach their expectations this year, a big part of it was injuries. Matthew Judon and Christian Gonzalez, Marcus Jones. But another part of it was both Dietrich Wise and Josh Uche, who had career years last year, kind of disappeared, man. Dietrich Wise was still serviceable, but was not the pocket pusher and the pass rusher that he was last year. Both his pass rush win rate dipped by a good 6 or 7%, which is a healthy chunk there. His pressure rate dipped about 20%, so just not the same player. And then Josh Uche fell off even harder. He went from, I think, 12th in pass rush win rate in 2022 to 115th in 2023. A unique kind of undersized breakout player from last year. There were expectations that he could turn into a star pass rusher, and it's gone in the complete opposite end of the spectrum. He's a pending free agent, and I think he's going to have to go get kind of like a 1-year prove-it deal out there somewhere. But on a positive note, his draft mate, Anthony Jennings, these two guys came into the league together and kind of both fairly hybrid edge skill sets. And Anthony Jennings, I always liked that pick for what he was, because at Alabama, he was a mean, nasty tone setter up front off the edge in run defense. Not a ton of a pass rush profile there. And that's just translated now to the next level. He's finally getting that big-time playing time here, and they're counting on him in that role. And, God, he has legit been one of the best run-defending edge players in the league. And Nick Saban should be proud of this guy. He was tied with Carl Granderson for 5th in the NFL in defensive stops, trailing just T.J. Watt, Danielle Hunter, Khalil Mack, and Max Crosby. It's pretty good company up there. And then for whatever stock you want to put in PFF run defense grade, he was 5th in the NFL in that as well. Not much as a pass rusher, just 20 pressures, 2 sacks on almost 300 pass rush snaps. But he absolutely has a role as that just on-ball edge, outside backer run defender in the league. And he, like Uche, are going to be a free agent this year, and I would bet that Gerard Mayo is going to be pounding the table to whoever's new GM is to get him back here. Now, Keon White, their rookie second-round pick, I think really settled in as doing a little bit of something different than he did at Georgia Tech. It's not a true edge role here. He's playing kind of that Dietrich Wise, Trey Flowers role here, and it's a good fit for him. I was not a big Keon White guy in the draft, but when he went to New England, I was like, oh, that's the perfect kind of scheme usage for him as that kind of hybrid tweener end. And he's taken to it. I think he's gotten better in run defense as the year's gone on. He hasn't had a ton of opportunities to just kind of pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. Thought he was super inconsistent at that in college. But I do think with the right development, he can overtake Dietrich Wise, who, like we saw, is regressing. So definitely a kind of breakout candidate next year, depending how much they want to use him. And then into the kind of second level with these linebackers, I'm going to lower Jawan Bentley. It hasn't been a bad season, but he's been one of the best run-defending linebackers in the league in the last couple of years, and he just hasn't been that this year. His stop rate has gone down. His missed tackle rate has gone down. His total tackles have gone down. Teams have been able to exploit him in coverage a little bit more. Yeah, nothing too concerning, but a little bit of a dip for him in his play this year needed to be reflected here. And then the other guy, Jelani Tavai, he snap by snap outplayed Bentley. I think he's a little bit more athletic than Bentley. Obviously has a higher draft pedigree, was a second-round pick for the Lions, and he's been awesome for New England. I really like what I see from Tavai. He's been much more active in coverage than Jawan Bentley. Both these guys play very similar roles. They're like identical sizes at like 6'2", 246. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see if Mayo wants to make any changes with this system or just leave this as is. If both these guys are starting, but two like-minded, like-bodied linebackers that the gap between these guys has certainly closed as Tavai's had this awesome season and Bentley's tapered off a little bit. And then Mack Wilson has rotated in as a coverage linebacker, especially in the second half of the year. And that's a perfect role for him because that's always been the bill on Mack Wilson is he's a really active, instinctive zone coverage defender. He's one of these guys that just he's got a loose neck and just is always, looking left to right, trying to find work as a zone coverage defender and gets in a lot of passing lanes. The problem is when he was in Cleveland, he missed tackles and was a horrible run defender. Well, if you can put him out there in passing situations only, in a way that Belichick-style defenses are so good at pinpointing guys' strengths and putting them in the right roles, well, guy can make some plays, and obviously Belichick had a plan for him, trading for him, And he's been really good in that role and has been able to make up for some of the lack of coverage that guys like Bentley and Tavai have here. So it's a really logical rotation with this group, and I wouldn't mix this up. These guys play really well in tandem. And then as we get to the secondary, I'm not going to lie, I was impressed with how this group held up. The combination of Shaun Wade, Alex Austin, and Miles Bryant, which is a total motley crew. It's a huge reflection of how many injuries that the Patriots have dealt with back there. And all these guys have slightly different backgrounds. Shaun Wade was a 5th-round pick by the Ravens that New England went and got. Was once upon a time like a projected maybe top 50 pick at Ohio State with those Justin Fields teams. Was a big name that fell in the draft and has been just kind of hanging around NFL depth charts until now. Alex Austin, a 7th-round rookie this year drafted by the Bills who didn't make the team. The Patriots pick him up. He played a lot of off zone and it was kind of not a good athlete, but an instinctive heady type of corner. And then Miles Bryant, who's obviously been around here in New England, an undrafted guy who I've been very critical of Miles Bryant. And I know a lot of Patriots fans were getting sick of Miles Bryant. But all these guys really stepped up. The Patriots put this whole thing together with Christian Barmore playing better, Anthony Jennings shitting on the run, these linebackers making plays, these safeties. Look, I know Belichick kind of had to go here, but he still had this motley crew defense as 9th in defensive DVOA by season's end. And this collection of cornerback talent, if you can call it talent, not a lot of physical tools in this group, but a lot of smart physical players here that held up really well on the back end. So just a huge credit across the board to those three. Probably don't need to dive into each individual's performance. They just all were very solid, not locked down or incredible or anything. But I think all of these guys have shown that they can be really good depth pieces for New England next year because you have Marcus Jones coming back in the slot, who I think you would still put over Miles Bryant. You have Jonathan Jones still. You have Christian Gonzalez set to come back. These guys shouldn't be starting over those players, but for them to get this playing time and settle in as good depth, that can be your 6 in your cornerback room. Set it and forget it for next year. And you can cut J.C. Jackson, who I don't know if he got hurt or benched in week 14, but he didn't see any snaps after that. I'm assuming he got hurt, but I mean, he's sucked here. He's sucked in LA. He's sucked since he left New England. And I don't just throw around that a guy has sucked. I normally will say he's played poor or has been exposed. J.C. Jackson has just been straight up trash. You could argue he's been the worst cover corner in the league when he's played for the last 2 seasons. And that's really unfortunate considering he was an all-pro caliber player when he left 2 years ago. So it's been to call it a fall from grace is an understatement, but the ball's in his court at this point to prove that he can still play. We're dropping him another 2 here. It's been -5 just in the 8 weeks that he played here in New England. And he was up there as an 86 or something when he left originally. So it's been a crazy fall off in just 2 years for him. But then one more guy going up, Jabril Peppers. What a freaking year Jabril has had, just figuring it all out. He is a super athlete that, he's been in different systems. He's been flirted with as a linebacker, as a return man. He just, at Michigan, was played all over the place. At the end of the day, he's just a really good safety. And he can play free, he can play strong, he can play down in the box. He's a nasty run defender, loves to hit. But I think we're really just seeing his confidence, his coverage IQ, his understanding of the position really coming together. And what's amazing is the Patriots have him back next year on the cheap. Just a $5.4 million cap hit next year. And honestly, he's still only 28 years old. I think I'm not going to say he's just getting started, but I think he's got another contract in him, probably here with New England and Mayo. And I think they've found their, in a lot of ways, their Devin McCourty replacement here. He's not quite the same as like a true single high free safety, but he is the athlete on the back end. And I think from a leadership and coverage understanding, he's really coming along in that regard. So I just can't really sing enough praises for Jabril Peppers. And then we will end Studs and Duds here on a very negative note. This kicker, Chad Ryland, I do not think will be back. He missed a total of 10 kicks this year, making just 64% of his field goals. A lot of people were laughing that, when a Bill Belichick coach team has such bad special teams, you knew it was the beginning of the end. And Chad Ryland was a huge part of that. Just brutal for the rookie kicker. A 4th-round pick, by the way. Stop drafting kickers, everybody. Anders Carlson, Chad Ryland. It just, more often than not, does not work out. You're better off picking from the undrafted scrap heap, picking veteran guys to pick up. I mean, just look at the difference between Nick Folk, who used to be here in New England, and what he did in Tennessee, where he had a great year at 38 years old or whatever, and Ryland. Like, I think that's worth the extra $600K or whatever to get that difference in there. But yeah, a lot of changes throughout the year, a lot of changes ahead for New England. I hope this kind of got everybody up to date on the state of their roster a little bit. And that is going to do it for today's division. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please hit that like button on the way out. It does help me out. Let me know in the comments down below where you agree. Which players do you disagree or think I omitted from your favorite teams? Let me know all of it in the comments down below. But until next time, peace out.